I'm going to just review a few of the different project delivery methods. This is not all project delivery methods. In order to keep it, doable for a chart, we're just going to really go over the difference between a GMP approach, which is a very popular way of doing construction traditionally. We consider the design build approach to be a little bit in between traditional GMP approach, and then of course IPD would be on the far side. So as you can see, under the GMP column, do we have a laser? Is it here? Under the GMP column, the owner, the architect, and the contractor each enter into a separate contract with, the architect and the contractor each enter into a separate contract with the owner. And so you have two separate agreements. The contractor is generally in control of the management of the project. The architect is not. The owner is not, although the owner has say, I guess, as to what's spent and not spent to a certain degree. The contractor is controlling the management and the administration process usually. Your cost control and your schedule control, for that matter, are usually guaranteed. So the contractor will usually, under a GMP scenario, guarantee cost, and they will guarantee milestone dates in the schedule, such as substantial and final completion. All your subs are usually on a lump sum basis. They don't participate in anything. If they've overbid the project, they keep the savings. If they've underbid it, oh well, they still have to keep performing. So, I mean, that's how the risk really kind of breaks down on lump sum. So, any savings that would be realized through subcontractors wouldn't be contributed back into the project under that scenario. And you can have savings participation under a GMP. So you can have that, but again, it would only be between the contractor and the owner, and it doesn't involve the designer whatsoever. Risk under a GMP is pretty much on the contractor. They are at risk for the schedule, and they are at risk for the cost. The architect is at risk for any design errors and omissions. So what happens is you can kind of get into a finger pointing scenario here in a claims issue, because the contractor just wants to blame it on design and blame the architect, and the architect blames it on the contractor, and you get into this, this entire finger pointing game, and nothing's really resolved. And usually also, because the architect is the owner's agent, it's kind of a 2-to-1 thing where the architect is siding with the owner plus covering their own potential liability, I guess, and pointing the finger at the contractor, and the contractor's kind of standing out there alone, and they've got the risk of the schedule and the risk of the cost. So it's not the best situation. Under the design build, it's a little bit better. You have an owner who's contracting with a design builder. Usually the contractor is in charge, and they subcontract with an architect or an engineering firm for the design. Sometimes people do joint venture, but typically that's the way it's done. And so the design build contractor manages the process and the construction, but they have their subcontracted architect or designer on board with them. They guarantee the cost and the schedule, usually, again, under this scenario. But you don't have the shift of the 2-to-1 finger pointing kind of, it shifts, because now instead of the architect being an agent of the owner and being on the owner's side, now they're on the contractor's side. Those two are on the same side of the equation. And so they're never wrong. It's always the owner that's causing the problem. And of course, the owner doesn't have any friends. He feels like a team. So you get into this whole finger pointing thing, and it's not a very balanced equation. The subcontractors are generally lump sum under design build, but you can have situations where they will subcontract with the MEP directly, so they won't have a mechanical and electrical consultant. They would just hire subcontractors to do the design work. And in that case, under design build, a lot of times those people will be on more of a cost reimbursable basis, similar to how the contractor might contract. Everyone else, of course, would be lump sum, or everyone can just be lump sum. And the risk allocation, the design builder has all the risk for the costs and the schedule and the errors and omissions in this case, because they've subcontracted the work to the architect. Now they're going to pass those costs through, but I guess from an owner's perspective, that is the one nice thing about design build, is the buck stops there. You can just say, not my problem, it's all on you, design builder, and you don't have to determine whether it was really a design issue or a construction issue. So it's one advantage. IPD, you have a multi-party agreement, as Howard and Annette have discussed. You've got the architect and the contractor executing one agreement with the owner. Here you have project team management, as everybody's discussed so far, and it's a one-to-one-to-one relationship. So you've eliminated the finger pointing because the owner, the architect, and the contractor are all managing the project jointly, and they all have the same rights and are allowed to have the same, have opine however they feel. They're collaborating as a team, and their risk is shared. If you look down at the bottom, you'll see that the risk is shared. And that's because there's a waiver of certain claims, a lot of claims, and we'll go over that a little bit later as to which ones are held back. But there's waiver of the majority of the claims, so people are free to collaborate early on. The risk is shared. The cost is shared. If they exceed the target cost, the owner, the architect, and the contractor all have skin in the game, and they are all sharing in that risk. Under the other two models, that's not the case. It's either just the architect and the contractor together under design build, or it's just usually the contractor under GMP. So here, the owner is stepping up to the plate, and they're sharing in that risk because they've been participating from the beginning. The other big distinction is your key subcontractors are brought in early on an IPD project, and they are usually also part of the shared risk and incentive. Under the Hanson Bridgett model, that's definitely the case, and we'll talk about some of the distinctions in the other agreements when I get to that section. This slide actually demonstrates the difference between a more traditional approach up here and an IPD approach. And it's the how, who, and what slide, I guess, is a good way to put it. And you'll notice that on the top traditional approach, you don't really determine what's being built until here. And at this point, this is a design bid build scenario. You've already gone through the whole design and all the permitting, and now you finally know what you're going to build. You're in the submittal process. And you may or may not be over cost at this point. If you're in a GM, because you don't figure out the cost until right here on this line, if I can get it, right there, just a little bit to the left of the what. So you can see where the GCs and the subs come in. That's your design bid build. If you're doing a GMP, you're probably back in this area somewhere. This thing is not working very well because usually they'll bring on some subs during design development and the construction document phase to start pricing things out if they know they're going to get the job. This is not in a public works situation. And so they'll have an idea of what's going on and who's going to be involved a little bit earlier, and if they're paid for pre-construction services. Under the IPD scenario, you can see everybody's on board pretty darn early here. The target cost is going to be set right in here somewhere between conceptualization and design criteria. That's when they're going to determine what the project schedule is. And so they're going to know pretty much what they're building earlier after detailed design, because they're using BIM and all kinds of technology. They pretty much know how this project's going to go. They know what they're building. They know who's going to build it pretty early because they have all key people involved back here, and anybody else is getting involved through the buyout phase in here. And they know how they're going to do it right after the agency issues permit. So everything is much, much earlier. And for sustainability purposes, this is really pretty key, because I think it's very difficult if you're going for any kind of certification to have key people coming on way over here between the construction documents and the agency and permitting if you're trying to achieve any kind of LEED certification. Now, your architect might be, a LEED accredited professional and may have an idea of how to achieve that goal, but until your contractor and those key people, especially MEP with regards to the energy and atmosphere credits, come on board, and if they come on board early, you bet they know how to do it. And the chances of achieving your goal are much, much greater if you've got all those key people on board right here. And they all have taken a stake in the project, and they've got incentive, and they're interested in the outcome. They're all working toward that same goal. So basically, we have the same old risks that we've always had in construction, but we have some new tools to manage it under IPD. And this is sort of just a repeat. Under the traditional approach, GMP, you've got lump sum subcontractors. you could have a lot of litigation if there's claims. You've got finger pointing between the architect and the contractor. Subs are pointing fingers. Everybody's pointing fingers. You usually have liquidated damages for delays, and again, just a lot of claims if things don't go well. Under the IPD approach, you've got people coming in early. They're collaborating together. They have a stake in the outcome. They are interested in the outcome. They are vested in the outcome. They've put a percentage of their profit at risk, and that's what's your profit, your buffer, to manage the project within that margin so that you're not going over and you're not overrunning the schedule. So you've got better management and control. You've got all three parties managing the project that are invested and have a stake in the outcome, not just the contractor or the designer in the case of design build. And if the project is successful, there's good incentives on the backside for everybody involved, and the owner gets what they want. So it's a win-win for everybody.